When I started in investments, I had about $9,800. And the whole problem then was I had way more ideas than money. I mean, I was looking for things. I was going through all the Moody's manuals and digging up ideas and stocks, all kinds of things that were cheap. But I still only had $9,800. So I would buy something and then I would find something that looked even cheaper or better, and I would have to sell the first thing to buy the second thing. That was my state for a long time. Now, in the late 1960s, I wound up my partnership because I couldn't find things, but that's because the whole market had gone crazy. And at that time, I was working with about $100 million in the partnership when I wound up the partnership. But $100 million wasn't an unmanageable amount of money. It's just that the market itself was just offering nothing. And so I sent the money back to my partners. But the most important thing to learn is how to value a business. It's also the toughest to explain. You look for certain things that allows you to narrow it down. If I'm a basketball coach, and I see a guy, I'm walking down the campus here, and I see somebody 7 feet tall, I'm interested. Now, he may not be coordinated. We may not be able to keep him in school. He may be robbing, stores at night or something, but he's still the right guy to be looking at. I mean, we can work with this guy. So I am interested in 7-footers, maybe 6'10". And if I see some guy that's 5'3", and he comes up to me, and he's dribbling away, and he's telling me, doing fancy moves, and he says, "Coach," and I said, "I'm your guy." I say, "Yeah, but if you get in there against these 7-footers, I'm not sure he'll be dribbling exactly the same way. I'm going to skip him. He may be a wonderful prospect and all that, but I'm not interested." So I am looking for signals that tell me in investments what height and a few things might tell me if I was a basketball coach. In the end, what I'm going to buy is the business where I feel extremely certain about the competitive advantage, extremely certain about the integrity and ability of the management, and where I think the discounted flow of the cash that business will produce over time makes sense in relation to its current price. You really are looking for a business where you see the future. And that's why we don't get in tech. It isn't that I don't love the computer and think it's doing all kinds of things for society. I just don't know what it's going to look like in terms of who's going to be selling what to whom and at what prices and against whom and all of that sort of thing 10 years from now. Whereas I know that people are going to be chewing Wrigley's chewing gum in 10 years. People sitting in front of a computer chewing gum will not behave way differently than people chewing gum, in this audience as we talk. I mean, there are certain things that won't be affected. Gillette razor blades. 70% of the value worldwide of razors and blades is Gillette. That's after almost 100 years of shaving, and everybody knows what a razor blade does. They all know how to buy the steel. They all know how to sell it through Walmart or whomever. It's 70% of the world. Now, part of that's because men don't like to change as much. When a man gets happy with something, he doesn't fool around with it a lot. Women are a little more inclined to experiment. But, for $25 a year, something you do every day, what better is the world going to offer you? 70%, just think of that. Coca-Cola, 19 billion cases of Coke products sold a year. Everybody in the world drinking it. Will that change dramatically in the next 10 years? I bet my life against that. We sell See's candy in California. There's 35 million people in California. But here they are, 35 million people. Everybody in California has something in their mind about See's candy. What candies are in your mind? Number one candy bar, Snickers. Number one candy bar 10 years ago was Snickers. Number one candy bar 20 years ago was Snickers. People don't fool around with candy bars. I mean, you cannot come out with lots of new bars and intrigue people. It's not like perfume or other things maybe where people experiment. If you go into the drugstore and you say, "I want a Snickers bar," and it's 60 cents, and the druggist says, "I've got something just as good for 55 cents called Joe Schmo's, caramel and nut bar," you're going to walk across the street. Now, when you walk across the street for a product, then you got a business. I mean, that is the test. Where a nickel doesn't make a difference. There is no good way to compete with Snickers. You want something where price competition is not solely going to be the determining factor. And that's true of razor blades, it's true of Snickers, it's true of See's candy, it's true of Coca-Cola, and there's a lot of things of which it isn't true. That mode is differentiation of product, differentiation of service, differentiation of location, whatever it may be. That's essential. One of the things I did in school, I'd go back and read papers from all the earlier panics and booms and so on. It's just people make the same mistakes over and over again. And they're enormously subject to a herd instinct. And they will go crazy, and it helps in going crazy to have some sort of an excuse. It sounds like it's different this time. But the truth is, if I've got $10 in my pocket that I received as a dividend from a business, it doesn't make any difference whether that came from Wrigley's Chewing Gum or from an internet company. I mean, the money spends the same. So the test of a business is not whether it does something glamorous, something new. It's how much cash it's going to produce over time. It's the only test. Investing is laying out money to get more money later on. Why lay it out otherwise? And the money doesn't know where it comes from. Where it comes from may determine something about the enduring competitive advantage and all that sort of thing. But money made from an internet company is no different than money made from a textile company or from a candy company or anything else. So anything new, it was uranium in the 50s, it was computer leasing in the late 60s. I mean, all kinds of things come along where rising prices coincide with glamour. And after a point, the rising prices themselves become the rationale for buying. People may dress it up in other forms in their mind, a little more respectable intellectually, but what they're really doing is they're just getting excited. And they will always get excited. I mean, greed and fear are the big things in markets. And you will see in your lifetime, greed and fear at different points that equal anything you've seen in the past. The human race does not get smarter in that respect, and they won't. That's a cheerful message. I mean, I want you to understand, you will get a chance to profit from others' folly in a huge way, and the trick is to profit from it, not participate in it. The proper temperament is far more important in successful investing than points of intellect. If you've got a reasonable intellect and the right temperament, you'll get very rich. And if you've got the wrong temperament for it, you'll get done in at some point. Anything times zero is zero, but it does happen. Where was the largest earthquake in the United States, continental United States, in our recorded history? It was in New Madrid, Missouri. Now, nobody down at New Madrid is sitting there worrying about another 8.4 or something, but it was an extraordinary event. In fact, there were 3 of them in about a 2-month period. The improbable happens. And in financial markets, the improbable happens far more often than people think by running statistical regressions and so on. 5 sigma events aren't 5 sigma events. You just have to keep your sanity, basically. If you just always write down on a piece of paper, if you're buying stock in a company, whether it makes widgets or it's an internet company and it has 100 million shares out and selling at 10, you say, I am buying XYZ at $1 billion. You're buying the business because, and then just list down the reasons. If more people did that, you won't have bubbles, but they won't do it. They'll give in exactly the same emotions that people have for centuries and centuries and centuries. Like I say, that's what makes incredible opportunities in the stock market. That's why stocks frequently have a high that's twice the low in a given year when everybody knows a business doesn't change in value like that except under unusual circumstances. The biggest investment mistakes have been mistakes of omission rather than commission. I mean, you see in our balance or in our income statement the mistakes that result from commission, but accounting doesn't pick up the mistakes of omission, and they're the huge ones. And nobody knows about it unless I feel in the mood to confess, which I don't often, but since you asked. I would say the biggest mistake, I've named a couple in the past. Now, I don't count as a mistake not buying Microsoft, for example. I met Bill Gates on July 5th, 1991. He spent about 10 hours explaining Microsoft to me. He did it with an orangutan the next day. He said that was easier, but it was fascinating to me. And I knew he was a terrific guy and a terrific manager, and Microsoft was a terrific company. So I went back and bought 100 shares just to keep track of it. But I didn't know enough to make the decision. I really didn't know what other people were doing in the field. So it was outside of what I call my circle of competence. And important thing in investing is not how big your circle is, it's knowing where the perimeter is so that you stay within the circle. And that costs billions of dollars, never shows up in our financial statements. An example I use more often now, more recent, was I set out, this is even worse, I set out to buy 100 million shares pre-split, 200 million shares of the present stock, of Walmart about 5 or 6 years ago. It was at $23 a share, so it would have cost us $2 billion free if we bought it. If we had bought it, it would be worth about 11.5 or 12 billion. Now, I knew enough to understand Walmart. I mean, I knew it was the retailing machine of all time. And what happened on that was I bought a few million shares, and then it went up. It probably went up to 23 1/8. Now, when a stock goes from 23 to 23 1/8, I mean, that's a major event around Berkshire. I mean, I have trouble adjusting. My license plate says thrifty, and the guy who designed it knew what he was saying. And so, like a dope, I just said, well, I'll wait till it gets back to where I was buying. It was a little more than 1/8, but nevertheless, I missed out on 8 or 9 billion. But those are the mistakes you don't see. Mistakes that you can see is Berkshire Hathaway, literally, today, is a merger of 3 companies in my business lifetime. There was the original Berkshire Hathaway, which we bought into in 1965, or bought control of in early 1965. And then there were 2 other companies called Blue Chip Stamps, a trading stamp company in California, and Diversified Retailing, a company that started out with a department store in Baltimore. All 3 of those were mistakes. Starting with the textile business, Berkshire was a textile company with 20 million in net worth. The whole 20 million was tied up in the textile business, and it was a lousy business. I bought it because it was cheap, not because it was good. And that's a mistake. It took me a long time to get over that. I learned under a fellow who was a magnificent human being, magnificent teacher, and did all kinds of things for me. He put the emphasis on buying things that were quantitatively cheap. That was the background from the 30s and 40s. I call it the used cigar butt approach to investing. I mean, you go around, you walk down the street, and you see a cigar butt, and it's kind of soggy and disgusting and repels you, but it's free. And there's maybe one puff left in it. So you think, what can I lose? So you pick it up and you see, and maybe there's one puff in it, but it didn't cost you anything, so if it isn't, all you've had is a soggy cigar butt in your mouth. That was Berkshire Hathaway back in 1965. It was the wrong kind of business to buy. It had actually lost significant money over the previous 10 years, but it was very cheap. So I bought in, and then all of a sudden I owned a textile business, a New England textile business. A New England textile business in New Bedford, Mass, where about 100 textile companies had gone out of business, and we were the last ones really foolish enough to be trying to make a profit. So it was a terrible base to build what has become Berkshire Hathaway on. I mean, we sat with that 20 million, which was originally 100% of our capital. We sat with that for about 20 years trying to make it work, and it never worked. So if I'd done the things subsequently we did in insurance and See's Candy and all kinds of other businesses, and done it from scratch and not put them in Berkshire, maybe Gates would have to move over. So with that great background, all three were mistakes. But we did go into these other businesses. I learned after a point that real thing in business is to be in good businesses with good people. And that's what works. And it's much more important than trying to buy something cheap. It may work okay occasionally, but it's no way to build a business over time. I don't dwell on them in the least. It doesn't make any difference. I mean, I've been having fun the whole time, and I'll continue to have fun. And actually, if you played golf and you scored a hole-in-one on every hole, it wouldn't be an interesting game after a while. I mean, if it had some magnet in the hole someplace and the ball automatically went to it, you'd give up golf. It's much more fun to play the game, par threes, par fives, occasionally hit one in the rough, and so on. It's a lot of fun. As the years have gone by and the capital I'm working with has increased, there's fewer and fewer opportunities. So I never have to sell anything now to raise money to buy something else. It just doesn't happen that way. Now I've got more money than ideas, and it'll probably stay that way. So I would say that when you're in a position with relatively little capital, you sell something when you find something that offers you more for your money, or about which you're sure. I mean, if two things are equally cheap, but you feel one is 100% certain you really understand the business, and the other you got 80% certainty, you go with the one you're certain of. If you're in my position, you basically don't sell. Very seldom. Now, looking back, we should have sold some things when the bubble was on because the valuations got so high that even if we'd sold, they were good businesses, but they just were at ridiculous prices. So with hindsight, that would have been the thing to do. But I don't feel terrible about that because the money would have gone into cash, and we might have bought them back cheaper, but we might not have. And generally speaking, if you've got a lot of capital, you're not going to find that many wonderful ideas. And if you look at the fortunes that are made in this country, generally they've been by owning a good business for a long period of time. And that's not the worst thing in the world. And that's the way people who joined with me in the 50s and 60s, they held on, a number of them. They might have danced around, and Berkshire was too high at certain times. They might have tried to sell it and buy it back, but usually that doesn't work very well. So I would say that if you lose confidence in the management or the business, you sell. There's no sense owning something where the competitive advantage is gone or where you think the management is bad news. You may wish to sell if the price gets too high, but that's more optional. The first two you should do. The third is somewhat optional. But if you're working with small sums of money, and I was finding things initially that were selling at like 2 times earnings, good businesses. And so if I found something at 2 times earnings and I owned something at 3 times earnings, I sold the 3 times to buy the 2 times. Looking back, I should have borrowed a little money and kept both, but that wasn't my style.